Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August Platform Talks. I am your host, Amy Keenan, and every month we host these on the last Wednesday at 2:30 Eastern Time for 30 minutes. And this is part of the ERP Update, which is a free resource for all ISVs, partners, customers, and any ERP, learning about the ecosystem and ERP specific content such as articles, webinars, events, and things like we're doing today. So welcome all to Can You Spot the Fraud? And today we're very excited to have Use as our founding sponsor as well as presenting with us. So today we're talking all about AP fraud, but maybe not in the way we normally would think about it. When we think about fraud, we tend to think there's going to be something obvious to find, a strange invoice, an amount that doesn't make sense, something that immediately looks suspicious. But what happens when everything looks pretty normal? The vendor is familiar, the invoice looks right, the amount makes sense. Would you know when to look twice? That's what we're digging into today. And joining me from Use is Alistair. Welcome, Alistair. Would you like to quickly introduce yourself before we dive in?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's great to be here. Looking forward to it. I am with the product team at Use. I've worked with a lot of emerging technologies in the past, including virtual reality, augmented reality, AI, robotic process automation, machine learning, across a lot of different industrial and vertical applications. And I handle the product strategy for Use. So I kind of look at what's emerging, how we develop products. I speak to a lot of customers about the pain points that affect them and different in finance and accounting and AP teams more broadly. So looking forward to being here today.
Yes, thank you so much. And this is going to be recorded, and we will be sending out the recording afterwards. Just if anybody has to jump off or would like to share with others on your team, we certainly will send that out to you as well. All right, so before we jump into some fraud examples, I want to kind of set the stage a little bit. When we think about fraud, we tend to think something is always going to look wrong or you're looking for something wrong, but it might be an invoice that looks completely normal, an email from a vendor you could recognize, a routine banking change, or a payment request that doesn't immediately raise any questions. Sometimes the clue is one little tiny detail that is easy to miss. So, Alistair, is this part of what makes AP fraud so difficult to catch?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think all of those contribute to a complicated story, process story that happens behind the scenes. That's why it's so difficult to capture specific instances of fraud or even enforce controls and governance.
Yeah. And I'm sure all of us have gotten those fraudulent emails, even personally, right? Or the something fraud related, because it's just happening more and more, and they're getting more sophisticated too.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Okay. So and that's really the point of this slide that we're looking at right now. The invoice isn't the only place we should be looking. It could be something in a vendor email, banking details, vendor information, account activity, or even the payment amount. And something may look completely normal until you have the context around it. So, is there one area here that you think finance teams tend to overlook the most based on all of these different scenarios?
I would say, and I'm coming up with this on the fly because Amy told me she was going to ask me this question just before we started. If I had to pick one, I would personally say banking details. The reason why I say that, if I had to pick an area, is because not because every fraud attempt is going to involve changing banking details, but that's where a legitimate payment can turn into a criminal payment at the point of execution. So, we're going to go through examples today, and even if a legitimate supplier sends a legitimate invoice, the amount's correct, goods are delivered, the approval happens normally, someone alters where the payment's going, everything else can look valid until you're wiring the money to the wrong place. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's scary too, actually, to think about that it could happen. Okay, so before we go through some of the examples that you're gonna show and go through Alistair today, there are really four things I want everyone to keep in the back of their mind. Did something change? Does something not match? Is something not normal or almost looks right? None of those necessarily mean fraud, but they may be a reason to take a second look. So let's set the stage for our think. Did you think you can spot it? Um, right now, all right, so Alistair's put together some amazing examples. We're going to do four different rounds, four different examples, and you're going to see how easy or not so easy it actually is to spot the frauds. And I'm very excited to have Alistair take over, go through these different scenarios and let you decide what you think is fraud or legit. So are you ready, Alistair?
Ready.
All right, round one.
All right. So, setting up a little bit of context on the slide. So, imagine here that we have a vendor that submitted legitimate invoices before, hundreds of even, legitimate invoices before. And their emails arrive monthly and this arrives through normal email channels, but whatever tool you're using identifies that the font of the banking information on the invoice is different from the font on the rest of the invoice.
So that would be a sign that it's not legit, correct?
But yeah, you let me know when you want me to.
Oh, sorry, yes.
How
All
much of
right.
a pause do you want me to give
No, no, no,
everyone?
no. Apologize. Okay,
So
so everyone,
I'll
yeah.
just say, been there, done that. Seen that exact thing with one of my clients, and they didn't catch it until they'd sent $65,000
Oof,
outside of the United States.
yikes. So everyone, do you think this invoice is fraud or legit? Put it in the chat if you'd like. And we'd like to see if you can notice. I guess no one wants to chat with us today about if it's fraud or legit, or maybe they're just not sure. Oh, we got some people. Let's see. Let me go look. Fraud. Someone put in fraud. Thank you so much, Clayton. Okay, let's Alistair tell us what it is.
Yeah. I mean, so this is it's a pretty big red flag on this one. And as Murph said, been there, done that. The fact that if you notice there's a fraud detection tab on the UI that you see over here, and if you happen to utilize any tools within finance operations and finance automation that's specifically designed to look at fraud, and there are a whole lot of different vectors that you can use to analyze the contextual legitimacy of documents going through various processes internally. If you've got anything that looks for very strong confidence markers that something's fraud, then that's a reason to consider it fraud, right? If there's a document that's generating an actual fraud report, yeah, it's probably fraud. But anytime you've got document, and this could be a legitimate document, right? As Murph said, like you can have people who intercept documents, who send in duplicate invoices, that are mirrors of something that's already been submitted and just change the banking information. So easy for those to escape notice, go through approvals, and for that money to be wired to an erroneous and criminal third party. So this is definitely a fraudulent one. Absolutely.
So in the case of my client, they actually had a virus that was running on their system that was intercepting emails anytime there was banking information involved and just substituting that before the email ever showed up to the recipient's inbox.
Hmm.
Wow, that's crazy and scary at the same time. All right, round two.
All right. So over here, you've got a plant manager who's messaging through Teams, messaging the AP team, and he's saying here that we urgently need a specific contractor paid now, today, or they're going to stop work. So there's an operational threat here, especially this is, potentially manufacturing. So this is going to have a massive operational impact, potentially hold up revenue, hit the bottom line. And some background, the vendor was onboarded yesterday. They've never been paid before. No PO exists. AP never participated in the onboarding. The team's under pressure to process immediately. Everybody just thinks, okay, this is another clear case, right? I think most people, this is highly, highly suspicious.
Oh yeah.
It might not be definitively fraud, but in this example, I think I was going for fraud. Yeah.
And everybody said fraud, so
Mhm.
which makes sense. But what's kind of scary though is they're actually accessing your Teams account, right? And they're actually pretending to be this person. So how do they even get to access to Teams with, it's just kind of scary.
Mhm.
But yes, everyone, fraud. You were correct, which especially when also with those words like urgently, which is usually also a red flag because they want you to pay right away and want their money. So there you go. All right, let's go to round number 3.
Okay, and we can, I want to just take a moment. People can absorb this example a little bit. Give a bit of context. What you're seeing here is 2 invoices side by side, both coming from the same vendor. And just take a glance over some of the header details and the line details and see if you can see anything different between these 2.
I see one difference so far. Do you want me to say it? Call it out?
I can start going through.
Okay.
So I think I mentioned, well, they're the same vendor. Clearly,
Yes. Is one fraudulent and one not fraudulent?
I will.
Okay.
Well, we won't get there yet. But same vendor, same amount. So the amounts are going to be exactly the same. The service period is the same as well. One piece of context that I haven't provided clearly here, it actually got chopped off from the top of the screen. They've arrived through 2 different channels. So the one invoice arrived through email and the one invoice arrived through a vendor portal. And then so there's actually 2 differences, I guess. There's actually 2 differences, but so I've just told you the second one, which is the 2 different receiving channels. So the one was received or captured through email. The other was captured through a vendor portal. And Amy, I think you've probably noticed the one other difference. You want to go ahead and say?
The invoice number?
So the invoice number is slightly different, just slightly.
I feel like the one with the A would be not the right one. But I could be wrong. Does anybody feel free to put in the chat what you think as well? If you got one of these or both of these invoices, would you be able to spot the difference? Let us know. All right, are you ready, Alistair, to let everyone know?
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. So this could go either way.
Okay.
Right. So I would say every single team deals with duplicate invoices, and duplicate invoices do not necessarily mean fraud at all, right? Everybody deals, it could be due to error. It could be due to a request on the AP side. Maybe the AP team received an invoice for an amount where there was a unit quantity discrepancy or unit price discrepancy, and they went back to the vendor and said, please resend the invoice. But they didn't cancel out the invoice within their system. So now they've got the existing invoice they asked that they received from the vendor, and now a new invoice the vendor sent, and you're going to get a duplicate if the vendor sends the same invoice number. So there can absolutely be valid situations where you get two duplicate invoices. But I will say that this is becoming a surprisingly common tactic where you get vendors the big flag here for me personally is the two separate channels, not necessarily the fact that they look similar except with just the invoice number difference. Because the vendor may have just resubmitted it based on a request from their customer. But when you get the vendor submitting duplicates through multiple channels, that starts to become a bigger amber and red flag for me personally. And then you get the slight invoice number variation, and they just hope that one slips through. And so that I would say it's not necessarily fraud, more investigation needed. I would say a follow up with the vendor and just to clarify. Yeah. And hopefully you're using a system that clearly flags duplicate documents when you get them in.
Yes, definitely. You definitely need something that does that. Okay, and last but not least, round 4.
Yeah, I didn't have an image with this one, but this is I like this one. Okay, so here you have so here's the example. You receive an invoice in, and the vendor has a historical average invoice quantity of around $8,000, right? Based on their, let's assume a history of sending, maybe hundreds of invoices over the past year or couple of years. Today's invoice is $125,000. And there's a valid PO that's attached to it. The receiving is matched. The contract that you might have set up with them supports that amount as well. The department VP is approved, and the vendors, I actually put there, the vendor's been in use for many years or for years. So let's say based on historical invoices they've sent over the past 2 years. I'm seeing, so a few people saying they'd be making a phone call, following up with the VP, right? Depending on the approval channel that the VP is used, maybe just double check on that one. Yep.
Yeah, just the amount alone, I would definitely want to follow up, because that is, if the average is 8,000 and now it's all of a sudden 125, that is that's a big jump.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, that historical average is the useful starting point, because large numbers are just large numbers, right? It purely depends on the vendor. A large amount tells you that it's a large amount. And what you really want to know is whether the large amount is statistically relevant compared to what the vendor's behavior has been over a specific historical period. So if you have a huge deviation in their normal invoicing behavior, I would say, just like everybody, you'd want a lot of different ticks in place for whether that's, adheres, whether it's consistent with a contract that they have or a PO that exists, the vendor relationship itself, but then also a call to the department VP or whoever it is that greenlit this payment, just to double check.
Yeah. I think if you didn't have the vendor historical average there, then it would obviously be you would probably approve it, right? Approve it, because that's, like you said, that is the main information.
And this is also useful. A lot of tools are now incorporating AI to include statistical behavioral analysis for vendors. So tracking vendor amounts over time, not just, but the standard deviation above their average amounts is meaningful, because it tells you how often, because it's possible they might have a tendency to bill $8,000 on average over the first half of the year, and then they typically have a large project or a large quarter towards the latter Q3 or Q4, which then kind of spikes their historical average. And so it's that kind of standard deviation and pattern analysis based on seasonality and times a year that helps you kind of contextualize. Again, not is this a big amount, but is this a much higher amount based on various different criteria for that vendor? And that's the stuff that enables you to kind of make contextualized decisions rather than just like, whoa, that's a big amount, something must be wrong. But it seems, giving you more information to make the better decisions at the time. So,
Yeah, definitely. All right. So before you click approve, after going through all of those examples, I think this really comes down to a few things. Obviously, look beyond the invoice. The clue might actually be somewhere else in the process. Pay attention to those small changes. Something that seems minor may be exactly what deserves a second look. The good news is we don't have to expect our AP teams to manually connect every email, vendor change, invoice, approval, and payment. That's where technology can help connect those clues. So, Alistair, before we wrap up, is there one thing you'd want everyone to remember the next time they're about to approve an invoice?
So before he makes
Yes.
this comment, I'm going to say, one of the things, especially if you're selling product, that becomes obvious relatively quick if you have a pattern of fraud developing is declining margins. You start to see that suddenly the difference between what you're paying and what you're taking in is shrinking because of essentially payment manipulation. And an example of that, and it's somewhat related to the last example that we looked at, was I had a client. Now, get this. The owner's son-in-law, who was the vice president, entered into a fraudulent arrangement with their primary vendor in which over time they would begin inflating the price of product and they would sub the, they would then pay him what amounted to a kickback, but they did that as a consulting fee for getting their business.
Oh, wow.
And over time, the price of what they were paying in the course of 2 years went up by 35% because they were, in effect, inflating it a few percent every month and paying this guy that percentage back. It really became noticeable when at the end of the quarter, we saw that margins were deflating. And at the end of the second quarter, they were deflating significantly. And the owner started saying, well, I guess we're going to have to increase, what we're charging our customers. But he said, it just doesn't seem legitimate. And sure enough, the VP was stupid enough to go out and buy a real expensive car. And the owner said, well, how on earth are you buying that? And he said, well, your daughter wanted it. Well, no, he knew better than that. And he was paying for it with all this extra funds. So declining margins, you need to identify why on earth your margins are declining, why your product is costing you more and more when there's really not a legitimate reason for it.
Well, I'm assuming he's not a son-in-law anymore and definitely not working there anymore.
Well, he actually is still a
Oh,
son-in-law, but
wow.
he's spending time in the big house, so to speak. Yeah, because son-in-law or not, he went to jail. So
Wow. Well, he should. Rightly so. All right, Alice, are you ready to mention the one thing you'd want everyone to remember the next time they're
Uh, uh, yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. The one
the
thing
one
I'd want.
thing.
Oh, I
I'm sure
guess.
there's a million, but
Yeah. I think the one thing that I would say before approving an invoice is approve the store. Don't approve the invoice. Encourage your teams to approve the story behind the invoice, the context behind the invoice. I think the one thing one thing I'd encourage people to think of is if teams are approving invoices, they should think to themselves, if this turns out to be fraud tomorrow, what clue would they wish they'd noticed today? What's the context? And in the broader kind of environment around AI, think to yourself, anytime there's something novel that happens, it seems to apply a time and urgency pressure. We've got, the other day we had a client who had a voice message from their CEO, and I didn't include this because I couldn't do a video, but it's so easy to deep fake and do AI voice cloning these days. Executive impersonation, and it adds so much urgency when you have someone who receives that demand or request for something to be moved on urgently for an approval level person to approve it and not escalate. And so, yeah, ask about the context. AI is incredibly good at spotting patterns, but people are better at understanding context a lot of the time. So I think the best defense is in combining both.
Mhm.
And in both cases, just think about the story and the context and within which you're approving.
Yeah, I like that. That's definitely important. All right. Well, everyone, and thank you, Alistair, for joining us today and giving all of these wonderful examples of how and where fraud can show up in the AP process. If you'd like to learn more about Use and how they're helping finance teams spot what others might be missing, you can find their website and contact information here. And of course, you can also connect with them on LinkedIn, where they share a lot of content. They also have a lot of resources on their website as well pertaining to this topic. So thank you again, Alistair and Murph, for being here with me. And thank you, everyone, for being here for the August Platform Talks. Next one is on September 30th, where we will talk about the ERP selection mistakes nobody notices until it's too late. So hopefully you'll join us for that one as well. And thank you, everyone, for being here and joining us. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.